is revelation.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the podcast. Rudy's Revelation. Finding revelation in the news and meaning in media. So today's top story is obviously John Bolton, the traitor in the first Trump administration, is indicted on 16 counts, 16 federal counts under the Espionage Act. Welcome to the podcast. It's Friday, October 17th. Happy Friday. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Thanks for joining me today. Before I get into the headlines, I wanted to talk about this arsonist story one more time. So there's an arsonist in California that set the LA wildfires obviously knowingly that the Santa Ana winds were blowing at like 100 miles an hour. This guy, Jonathan Rinderknecht, 29, started the fires. So USA Today has the headline, the man suspected of starting deadly Palisades fire indicted on federal charges. Now, a lot of us said that when the firefighters, the LA fire started, that we all knew it was arson. As I believe Maui fires were, but I don't want to get down that road. But I kept referring to this other guy, this other arsonist from earlier in the year, just in June, who not only set wildfires also in Idaho, but when the firefighters responded, shot at them. It was unclear at the time, something weird about the reporting. He was supposed to be up in a tree. He shot at the firefighters with a shotgun, killing 2, wounded several others, but then firefighters were said to be hiding behind the fire engines when they were shot. So, but in any case, I wanted to go back to this story from June. Idaho shooting suspect identified, motive for ambush of firefighter still unknown. It's from CBS News. So the suspect was 20-year-old Wes Rowley. His body was found at the scene of the fire late Sunday night along with a firearm. It appears that suspect shot himself. So they say, but this guy he wasn't 29, he was 20, but they shared similar backgrounds. They were both loners. This guy, Wes Rowley, wanted to be a firefighter, and then him and Rinderknecht were both driving around the country or driving to the state and living out of their cars and so on. But they both were loners, had no friends, whatever. And they both ended up setting wildfires, arson. CBS News article doesn't mention that. But there's a connection here. 2 loners, they both shared similar ideology. And then they went out and committed arson. One guy shot at the firefighters and killed 2 in this little reported story. And now we have this thing, very similar situation, similar suspect, sharing the same psychological profile. 2 arsons, major crimes. All right, let's see if we can't delve into the headlines today for Friday, October 17th. So we're going to start with the big story of the day. Reuters, ex-Trump advisor, he was a national security advisor, Bolton, to appear in court charged with mishandling classified documentation. So the thing with NSA, a national security advisor, is they know the innermost secrets of the White House, particularly when it comes to defense. And apparently he was not only storing it haphazardly. When you work for the United States government, you don't think other government's going to hack you. So it's very similar to Hillary Clinton with a classified server. But John Bolton, in this instance, had classified information on an AOL account. Some of these accounts, Yahoo, AOL, don't have very good security. So he put it on AOL server, and then we don't know really what happened to it. But the Federalist has the headline: John Bolton indicted on 18 counts for mishandling classified information. Bolton abused his position as National Security Advisor by sharing and retaining top secret classified information. This is what they were trying to get Trump on, but Trump was a president, so the president allowed. And also, as a president, you have the power to declassify. So, but people like vice presidents and senators and National Security Advisor can't take your work home with you, or if you do, you can't retain it after you're out of that position. You turn it, destroy it. Didn't do, so we retained it. And it's unclear where that information went, but still, this is part of Trump's promise to drain the swamp, which, to be perfectly honest with you, if you were going to pull out one prominent swamp creature in Washington, D.C., it would be John Bolton. PJ Media also has the headline, John Bolton indicted, Trump reacts. This is from townhall.com. President Trump just responded to the news that John Bolton has been indicted by a grand jury. I didn't know that. You're telling me for the first time. I think he's a bad person. Too bad for him, sort of what he's saying there. And also previously, when we were talking about the indictments, just so you know, they're all, I think it's 8 and 8, 16 counts, all under the Espionage Act. So, like I said, if you're a national security advisor, you're dealing with very privileged information. We saw what happened with Mike Waltz, that you can't play loose with this. I mean, I think the thing with Mike Waltz was Signal is, people don't understand, Signal is an AOL email. And then I wanted to go back to the story I covered yesterday, which is a prominent story, and I think one of the most political stories of the year. It doesn't look like the Supreme Court is going to make a decision yet, but Reuters is reporting Louisiana voting case, U.S. Supreme Court ponders a colorblind constitution. The Constitution is colorblind. So we'll just get into the argument. We'll start with the Federalist. Here are the 6 moments from SCOTUS arguments in landmark race-based redistricting case. Say that 10 times fast. And I'm just going to go through these briefly. Jackson said, what about the disabled? So she compared black people with the disabled because the Voting Rights Act is about access to polls. And they're saying black people don't have access. That's her argument. Compared them to, and I went over this yesterday, with most people in the 21st century can get to the, that's not about being disabled. And now we have, in most cases, and in most states, we have mail-in ballots, which I think is unconstitutional, but you could always get an absentee ballot. And you would have to provide an ID, a copy of your ID. All right. And then Clarence Thomas's argument, when he asked a simple but meaningful question, and I'll just read from the text here from this story. While questioning Louisiana Solicitor General Ben Aguinaga, Thomas asked what role the federal district court block on the state's initial map played in the development of the new map that included a second black majority district So they're getting another district in any case. The state solicitor general disclosed that the court's order is the only reason Louisiana drew a new. We did not think that the Constitution permitted us to draw a secondary majority black district. As you know, under protest, we drew the new map because the threat was that the federal courts would do it if we did it. So what they're trying to do is draw a new black district, and the way their Democrats have always districted is around color, because they believe, and in some instances true, that black communities will vote dominantly for Democrats. And then DOJ official silences Sotomayor, arguing on the side of the Louisiana. Principal Deputy Solicitor General Hashim Mupon got into a testing exchange with Associate Justice Sotomayor over the Pelican State, that's Louisiana, creation of a second black majority district. And that's what the case is. If these were white Democrats, there's no reason to think that they would have a second district. None. The Solicitor General said. And so what's happening here is their argument is because these Democrats happen to be black, they get a second district, and that's suit. If they were all white, we would all agree that they would get a second period. And then I went over this yesterday. Gorsuch traps the NAACP lawyer, basically illustrating the same thing, is that getting electoral district affirmative action in many senses, creating districts or moving districts or redistricting to include large populations of, and in this case, and then the endpoint to race-based redistricting, and then they go down, that the endpoint is creating favorable position in districts for Democrats, black. And then, of course, Ketanji Brown Jackson also loses her cool, as the Federalist puts it. If the plaintiffs came in and said, we want another majority black district, but was abruptly cut off by Jackson, this is Solicitor General again. And Jackson said, I thought they came in and said we are not receiving equal electoral opportunity because our votes are being diluted, black community, which is the same way. And then the Solicitor General went on to say, which is the same way of saying we deserve another second majority black district. That's exactly what I'm arguing. All right, then I will move on to ICE. Now, this is the Washington Post. ICE amps up its surveillance powers targeting immigrants and Antifa. So the Washington Post says here that although ICE has its right, all law enforcement has the right to surveil suspects, and they're targeting immigrants, obviously, because that's what ICE does, but also ICE, I guess, is being permitted by the federal government and the FBI to not only surveil, but detain, arrest terrorist organization or members of terrorist organizations who assault them or try to obstruct ICE. The story starts out by saying the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency has been rapidly building out its surveillance capabilities in recent weeks, signing a string of contracts for technologies to identify individuals by their irises or facial features. So it's face recognition software. To monitor their cell phone activity, also social media posts, obviously, physical movements, according to a review of federal spending disclosures. So it's transparency. It's in there. The blitz of surveillance purchases is motivated in large part by ICE's intensive nationwide campaign to find and deport undocumented immigrants. Duh. I mean, this is the Washington Post, so it's like, yeah, that's the nature of the agency mission. But documents show that some of the technology may also be used to target what is the administration regards as anti-ICE extremist groups. That's what gives ICE the power to do basically what is an FBI job, which is to monitor terrorist cells, other subversives in the nation's interior. Last month, President Donald Trump declared Antifa a domestic, and put it in quote, domestic or terrorist organization in the wake of violent clashes and the Dallas shooting at an ICE facility. We're going to get to that story in just a minute, too. There have been some developments because of their new terrorism charges. So ordering in all federal agencies to devote resources to investigating what he defined as militarist, anarchist, it's true, enterprise. And so I recently rehashed a bunch of research on anarchist group, anarcho-communists, anarchist communism, groups, foundations, syndicalism, and other leftisms that I don't want to say it was into, but, you know, especially syndicalism. I was looking at that. I wouldn't consider myself syndicalist. Looking at that alternative form of government, but never an anarchist. That's for sure. So, militarist, anarchist enterprise that he explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government. Anarchists don't want. And also to undermine and overthrow law enforcement agencies, defund the police. Black Lives Matter had this anarchist streak to it, and our system of law. So that's anarchy. So anarchists have always been targeted by governments simply because the ideologies, they don't want government. So they're anti-government. So, you know, and then you have the Haymarket. If you don't know what that is. The Washington Times has 2 arrested in Texas immigration detention center shooting now face terrorism-related charges because they were part of Antifa, card-carrying Antifa. They were some of the people. Yeah, I'm Antifa. Even though apparently Antifa doesn't exist. They do have members, but the problem is there are not a lot of card-carrying members. And so that's why people said, oh, it doesn't really exist. It does exist, but like I said, with groups like this, a lot of times they don't want to have leaders, and don't want to identify the groups, because then if the group is targeted, they're going to be switched. So the 2 people arrested or are charged on new terrorism charges are 2 of the Antifa cell. Autumn Hill and Zachary Evitz were indicted Wednesday by a federal grand jury in Fort Worth on charges that included providing material support to terrorists, Antifa, and attempting to murder officers and employees of the U.S. federal government. The prosecutors accused them of being members of Antifa, a cell that planned the shooting. Of course they were. They were disparate people that got together for this. Federalist, DOJ brings terrorism charges against militant Antifa cell that attacked ICE facility. These are reportedly the first terrorism charges associated with. Good. The problem is that the federal government has to do something in this because a lot of states, particularly Oregon, Portland, and Washington, west there, their hands-off approach to Antifa. There are Antifa people. I mean, I've seen people with Antifa shirts, Antifa flags, all dressed in black bloc. And to stay with the ICE thread we've got going here, there was an illegal immigrant who had been here for 10 years. Post-Millennial is reporting Illinois cop authorized to carry a gun arrested by ICE for 10-year visa overstay. And this guy's name was Radul Bojovic taken into custody as part of Operation Midway Blitz. Bojovic, an illegal immigrant from Montenegro, that's in the Balkans, was arrested on October 15th in the Chicago suburb of Hanover Park. Overstayed his visitor visa and had been required to leave the country by March 31st, 2015. Didn't. And he was a police officer, and he's allowed to carry a gun for his duties, but illegal immigrants or immigrants, especially on B2 visas, aren't allowed to purchase firearms in the United States or allowed to carry firearms. This is from Just the News. DOJ charges Massachusetts women with allegedly threatening to kill federal agents. The woman, identified as 37-year-old Bethany Abigail Terrell, allegedly invoked the death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk and claimed that she was going to kill federal agents who were carrying out their immigration-related arrest, as they're allowed to do by law. So, threatening officers with death or violence. Then another Just the News article, FBI Director Kash Patel has found more weaponization of crimes within the FBI, and they also said he's close to solving who's funding Antifa. So this is when it's going to get pretty interesting, because then you're going to have funders of a domestic terrorist organization. Declaring Antifa a terrorist organization is beneficial for our side, certainly in a bunch of ways, because it's going to expose some of these groups' ties. It's associated with George Soros and some of the other NGOs that are involved in this kind of obstructionism. The Bureau is on the verge of unmasking the command structure and financing for anarchist groups like Antifa that have unleashed unrest around America and are also identified potential new criminal activity relating to the abuse of federal law enforcement. Good for us. So, see, No Kings organizer discourages violence following coast-to-coast arrests. This is from Fox News. Progressive watchdog group rejects claims No Kings has turned violent despite arrests, deaths at demonstrations. So if you remember, after Trump took office, they had a bunch of No Kings. It's a national protest. So a bunch of No Kings things, they kind of fizzled out, but they were marked by crime, violence, and a death. One death. And so she says, nah, they're not going to be violent. Progressive watchdog group's Public Citizen says No Kings demonstrations are meant to defend democracy and protest what organizers call executive outreach. Yet national arrests, injuries, and warnings about outside agitators are added to the complexity to that narrative. Basically, it's because Antifa, that doesn't exist, domestic terrorist organization that doesn't exist, sends members to the No Kings thing. They're the ones that are causing vandalism, committing crime, violence. So, because that's leftists. I mean, the far left and down, anarchists, they're extremists. So, bringing the party down. And this whole scheme to keep the government shut and then culminate it with No Kings, I just don't think. Debate always trumps anger, protest. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm all for going in the streets, protesting. But protesting is protesting. You hold up clearly clearly written signs. Use your bullhorn. Get people to gather around, but also you have to do media. Get your message out there. And then get a try and get an opportunity to debate the politicians who may be responsible for whatever injustice. That's protest. And then if your message resonates, then you get a lot of people in the street. But going out with like 100 people, whatever. I'm all for protests. You can't clash with police. Then when they ask you to disperse, you gotta, it's time to go home. Okay. Especially, I would be mortified if I was at a protest, then outside agitators came in and started committing violence. So I want to move on over to Mamdani and the New York City mayoral debate. I watched a great deal of it. New York Post says New York City mayoral debate. Zohran Mamdani fails to detail a plan for bringing businesses to New York City to close out first debate. I watched most of the debate. I'm not a fan of Curtis Sliwa. I don't really even like him, and I didn't think he has a very good chance of winning. However, I think he won the debate. You had Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, and murder old people. And then you had the communist Mamdani, and Curtis Sliwa was in the middle, and he was just dropping truth bombs while the other two communists tried to outdo themselves. The post-millennial Curtis Sliwa slams the dual architects of Democrat failure in New York City, Mamdani and Cuomo. We have the architect and the apprentice of no cash bail, which has been a disaster. We have the architect and the apprentice of raise the age. And he's talking about raising the age for juveniles or something. In any case, it's a velvet glove approach to juvenile crime in New York City. And we have the architect and the apprentice of closing Rikers Island, which would just release criminals into the street. He contends. He was freaking hysterical. I thought it was great. Moving on to the next headline, PJ Media. NBC News terminates nearly 150 DEI editorial staffers from the newsroom. And it has a picture here of Rachel Maddow. I wish she's with MS. Good. And you see what CBS is doing, right? It hired Barry Weiss to run, and she, I guess, already made a staffing hire, somebody in charge of, hard to explain, the direction of the news network. Director. She fired him. And NBC now terminates 150 DEI editorial staffers. I think DEI is just a communist thing. It's always take weak people and promote them to get them involved in a political cause to the detriment of whatever agency or corporation. Should always be merit. In a free society, merit-based promotion is the best. Because then that person helps the business grows, more profitable, then ideally, ethically, you then disperse among your employees fruits of that labor. Anyway. So Alex Jones yesterday showed the clip of Mitch McConnell falling down twice. He falls on camera twice. And it's not like he tripped or anything. He just collapsed twice. Then they tried to help him and he collapsed the second time. The turtle has stayed past his right? He's like spoiled milk. These old guys, Strom Thurmond, I think, served to what was he, 103. One of these days, you got to call it. You know what I mean? But these people, career politicians, they're an industry unto themselves. And so they have staffers. There's a whole apparatus that's erected around these guys. And just like Joe Biden, and they'll just push the guy along in a wheelchair. All right, Letitia James, she was indicted also. So the list is growing. And first of all, a law enforcement officer, if she knowingly breaks the law, commits fraud, she needs to be, even if she's not convicted, she needs to be removed. The Justice Department in New York. Letitia James' criminal kin have been charged 11 times in 5 years, but they keep getting off easy. And then it just tells a story of one of her grandnieces or niece or whatever. They're just criminals. And I don't think it's nepotism per se, but it's just the way New York handles people that commit crimes. Broken windows. Now, you're not going to put people involved in with nonviolent crime in prison. However, repeat offenders for other crimes, property crime, stealing and whatever. After multiple times, at least a slap on the wrist is like 30 days in jail. That's a slap on the wrist. Slapping on the wrist isn't like go home and do 8 community hours. Because if you spend time in jail, you have time to think about what you do. But this guy, Andrew Cuomo, a former prosecutor in Fairfax County, said, there's nothing I saw that explains why the prosecutor would not go forward with some sort of consequences for the criminal behavior. Prosecutors have a lot of power and they can be merciful, but they just don't drop the charges like that. So, in this cases here, it wasn't even that they received a light sentence, they just dropped the charges entirely. And then, so I'm going to show the picture. So there's one, Nakia Monique Thompson, who lives in one of the houses, one of Letitia James's houses. And then Shamise Thompson Hairston, Carla Hairston, and Courtney Celise Hairston. They all live in the same house bought by Letitia James, under the fraudulent premise that they were primary residences of Letitia James, but she's just buying her for her criminal relatives there that need a hand up. Big story also from Reuters, gold tops 4,300, set for the biggest weekly surge since 2008. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I have some physical gold, but at the beginning of COVID, when it was 1,600, I just should have bought more. And I was set to buy more. I didn't like where I was getting it from at the time, and I thought I was going to. Post-millennial, Trump to meet with Putin. Zelensky. So he's going to meet with Putin, I think, in Hungary, in Budapest. And then he's going to meet Zelensky sometime after. There's no date for that. I went over this story once already too, but I need to hit it. Zero hedge. Went over this yesterday in a BBC story. China caught in large-scale espionage against the United Kingdom. That's Britain, if you didn't know. Yet case collapses over Beijing appeasement, says MI5 officials. I think they took this right from the BBC. Chinese intelligence services conducted large-scale espionage operations against the UK, accessing classified government computer systems for over a decade, a senior British government official told prosecutors. And you also have to make it clear, though, that they're communist. My problem with journalism or journalists, papers, news outlets in general, is that when they speak about China, it's not fair because China's a big country. And you need to speak about the communists who run the country. So every time you refer to China, it should be communist China. If you want to talk about the party in those terms, you could talk about the Chinese Communist Party, but when you talk in China, you talk about communist China because realistically, Taiwan is China. Taiwanese China, free China. The Taiwanese are not called themselves Taiwanese, they're Chinese. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Little rusty. I'm using this new system, and it saves a ton of RAM, but it's kind of complicated. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. Please engage the channel and share the podcast. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. Say hip to the trick. Join me every day, Monday through Friday. Live stream, 10 a.m. And we will see you next week. Respect.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.